The sun bled across the New Mexico sky, a molten coin sinking behind distant mesas. Heat shimmered over the prairie, though the day was dying, and a dry wind carried the scent of smoke that did not belong to sunset. Elias McCrae rode hard across the last rise, his horse lathered and blowing, and the sight waiting below struck him silent. Where his homestead had stood, whitewashed boards, a pitched roof, a porch where his grandchildren once played, only black skeletons remained. Flames still licked the rafters, twisting upward like the last cries of the living. The wind hissed through charred timbers and rattled the loose tin of the barn. Coyotes howled from the sagebrush, their voices thin and hungry. Elias swung down from the saddle, knees stiff, boots crunching on glassy embers. The metallic tang of spent gunpowder clung to the air, sharp as blood. He called out a name, his son's name, but the silence that answered was heavier than grief. He moved through the ruins with the care of a man who feared what he might find. The corral fence was splintered where horses had broken free, and the well bucket lay overturned in the dust. A doll, its face scorched, rested against a stone like a lost child waiting to be found. Elias knelt, lifting it with rough fingers that trembled despite a lifetime of calluses. The cloth smelled of smoke and the faint sweetness of his granddaughter's hair. Beside the well lay a trail of footprints, boot heels sharp in the ash. More than half a dozen men, heavy and careless, their tracks pressed deep as if mocking the earth itself. Elias crouched, examining the sign with a hunter's precision that no one in town remembered he possessed. Fresh. Less than an hour old. A dark smear of blood led toward the mesquite line where the prairie rolled west. A low moan drew him to the shadow of the barn. His daughter-in-law, Mary, lay slumped against a beam blackened to charcoal. Her breath fluttered like a bird's. Elias slid beside her, cradling her shoulders. "Mary," he whispered. Her eyes flickered open, reflecting the fire's dying light. "They wanted gold," she rasped. "Said Jed Caro, Black Vulture." The name broke apart on her tongue. "Took the strongbox, killed." Her chest shuddered once, and then she was still. For a long moment he held her, listening to the distant coyotes and the crack of falling timbers. The old man's heart thudded with a slow, terrible clarity. Jed Black Vulture Caro, an outlaw whose cruelty drifted through saloons like a foul wind. Elias had heard the stories, stagecoach robberies, ranch raids, bodies left for buzzards. He had thought those tales belonged to younger men's worries, the kind that haunted border marshals and army scouts, not a quiet rancher past his fighting years. A faint chorus of hoofbeats came from the east. Lantern light bobbed among the cottonwoods as neighbors approached, too late to be of use. Sheriff Hartwell led the small posse, his hat brim shadowing a face drawn tight with dread. Horses stamped and snorted at the smell of blood. "Dear God," the sheriff breathed, sliding from the saddle. "Elias, I'm sorry." His men fanned out, muttering prayers, but the old rancher barely heard them. "They went west," Elias said, voice low and steady. "6, maybe 7 riders. Less than an hour ago." Hartwell crouched near the tracks, squinting through the smoke. "We'll form a posse, but it'll take time. I'll wire the territorial marshal." "They'll be in the Sierra Sangre before dawn," Elias interrupted. "By the time papers are signed, they'll be ghosts." The sheriff placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not young anymore. This isn't your fight alone." Elias looked past him to the prairie, where the horizon burned with dying light. The land seemed endless, a vast stage for violence and memory. "It became my fight the moment they stepped onto this ground," he said. He left the sheriff without another word, moving through the wreckage until he found the cedar chest buried beneath fallen boards. Inside lay an oilskin bundle untouched by flame. He unwrapped it with slow reverence, revealing a Colt revolver, its steel worn smooth by years of use, and a weathered cartridge belt. The leather smelled faintly of campfire and sweat from another life, a life the town of Red Crossing had never known. Hartwell watched, uneasy. "You keep that for old time's sake," he said. "Don't mean you have to use it." Elias buckled the belt with deliberate care. "Old times ain't done with me." A neighbor stepped forward, a young man named Roe who had helped mend the south fence last spring. "We'll ride with you," he offered. Others murmured agreement, but Elias shook his head. "This is a trail you don't want," he said. "Black Vulture Caro isn't a mun to chase with green hearts." The posse shifted, eyes averted. They had heard the legends, knew the outlaw's cruelty. The sheriff exhaled through his nose, resigned. "At least wait for dawn," he said. Elias mounted his horse, the old gelding restless beneath him. Dawn will be too late. The wind rose, scattering sparks across the blackened yard. He looked once more at the ruins, at the charred doorframe where his grandchildren had once carved their initials, at the stone heart that had warmed them through countless winters. The memories pressed against him like ghosts, but they did not bend his back. "Elias," the sheriff called softly, "what are you now?" "A rancher. A lawman." The old man turned in the saddle, eyes reflecting the last ember of firelight. "A hunter," he said, and nudged the horse into the dark. The prairie opened before him, vast and silver beneath the rising moon. Sagebrush rolled like a restless sea, and far off a lonely wolf gave voice to the night. Elias rode without haste, every sense sharpened, the old instinct steering awake. Once, long ago, he had tracked raiding parties through country as harsh as this. Once, men had whispered a name, Ghost Hawk, for the scout who moved unseen and struck with certainty. He had laid that name aside when the war ended, when cattle and family promised peace. But some names are only buried, never gone. As he crested the next ridge, the smoke from his ruined home thinned behind him, a fading smear against the stars. Ahead lay the dark sweep of the Sangre foothills where the bandits would make camp, thinking themselves safe. The wind carried their trail, horse sweat, cheap whiskey, the faint echo of cruel laughter. Elias leaned forward, the cold heavy at his hip, and let the night swallow him whole. Moonlight washed the prairie in silver, turning every blade of grama grass into a whispering knife. Elias McCrae reined his horse at the edge of a dry arroyo and slid to the ground. The night smelled of dust and faint gun oil, the kind of scent that once guided him through war. He crouched low, gloved fingers tracing the story pressed into the earth, fresh hoof prints, 7 sets, iron shoes sharp against the cracked clay. One horse favored a hind leg, the print deeper on the left. Another rider carried weight beyond his own, the drag of a saddlebag gouging a shallow groove. They were less than 2 hours ahead. He let his eyes drift to the horizon where the Sangre peaks loomed, black and serrated against a sky pricked with cold stars. Lightning flickered far to the south, silent and distant, a phantom storm. The men he hunted believed distance was their ally, but Elias read the land the way other men read scripture. The shift of sand, the angle of a broken mesquite branch, the faint scent of sweat carried on the wind, none escaped him. Long ago, in another life, he had done this for the government. He had worn the badge of a federal scout when the Apache wars raged across these same deserts. Townsfolk remembered only a quiet rancher who raised cattle and grandchildren, but the truth lay coiled beneath that calm exterior like a sleeping rattler. In those years he had tracked warriors through country as ruthless as their hearts, slipping across stone and sage so silently that even the hawks missed his passing. Men called him Ghost Hawk because he appeared where death was certain and vanished before dawn. He had buried that name with his youth and the blood it carried, trading it for a wife, a son, and the fragile peace of family. Now the land called the old skill back, and he answered without hesitation. He mounted again and rode west, the gelding's hooves muffled in the dry wash. The night deepened, stars hard as flint, and the desert stretched endless as the memory of war. When the first pale edge of dawn burned behind him, he saw the low roof of Pariah Trading Post crouched against a scatter of boulders like a wary animal. Smoke from a dying fire curled from the chimney. A bell above the door jangled when he stepped inside. The place smelled of coffee grounds and old hides. Behind the counter stood a stooped man with one milky eye, the other sharp as a hawk's. He looked Elias over, gaze snagging on the revolver worn high on his hip. "You're up early for a drifter," the storekeeper said, voice rough with age. "Looking for riders," Elias replied. "7 men. Passed this way in the night." The one-eyed man tilted his head, the good eye narrowing. "Heard him just after midnight. Didn't stop. Headed for Sierra Sangre, riding hard." He rubbed his chin, considering. Black vulture Caro among them. I'd stake my last cartridge on it. Mean as a snake, that one. You trailing him? I am. A dry chuckle. Then I'll say a prayer you don't waste it. Folks who go after Caro usually end up coyote bones. Elias bought coffee and a sack of cartridges, sliding coin across the counter without a word. The storekeeper accepted the trade, his expression shifting from curiosity to a quiet respect. "You ride careful, stranger," he said. "Storms building in them canyons. Sky'll crack like God's own whip tonight." Outside, clouds were already boiling over the western ridges, their underbellies lit by stray veins of lightning. The air carried a metallic weight that promised rain, rare and violent. Elias mounted and turned his horse toward the black line of mountains. By midday he found the sheriff waiting at a shallow crossing of a dry river, had pulled low against the growing wind. Sheriff Hartwell had followed alone, his chestnut mare slick with sweat. "Thought you might come this way," Hartwell said, reining close. "Figured you'd ignore sense." Elias kept his gaze on the far peaks. "I don't have time for sense." Hartwell's jaw tightened. The marshal wired back. "He's sending men. Give it a day and we'll ride with proper backing. You go in now. You'll die in those canyons." "They're less than half a day ahead," Elias said. "Every hour I wait is another mile of trail lost." The sheriff studied him, eyes searching for the weary rancher he'd known, but found something older and harder. "You were a soldier once," he said quietly. "People in town whisper it." "Not a soldier," Elias corrected. "A scout." Hartwell exhaled, the sound half a curse. "So that's why you move like a damn ghost." He shook his head. "Doesn't change the math. 7 killers against 1 old man." Elias finally met his gaze. "Law rides slow. Death rides fast. I won't let Caro vanish into Mexico while you wait for signatures." The sheriff looked away first, spitting into the dust. "I can't stop you," he said. "But I won't be the one to tell your neighbors why you never came home." Elias gave a single nod and turned his horse westward. The mare stamped in protest as Hartwell watched him go, the growing storm rumbling like distant artillery. The land changed as the day bled toward evening. Rolling prairie gave way to jagged mesas that slashed the sky. The wind funneled through narrow draws, carrying the dry scent of lightning-scorched sage. Elias dismounted often to read the trail. A bent cholla branch here, a fresh scrape on basalt there, every sign a word in a language few alive could still read. He followed without pause, body moving on instinct older than memory. As dusk settled, the Sierra Sangre canyons rose before him, their cliffs glowing the deep red of spilled blood. Shadows pooled in the ravines, thick as ink. Far above, thunderheads flickered, a silent war of light. The air tasted of iron and the promise of rain. He paused on a ridge to rest the horse, scanning the labyrinth below. Somewhere amid those twisting gorges the outlaws camped, certain the night would hide them. Elias listened to the desert's quiet murmur, the rustle of wind through Ocotillo, the faint clatter of dislodged stones, and felt the old name stir once more. Ghost Hawk. It had been years since anyone spoke it, but it fit like a second skin. He thought of his son, of the grandchildren whose laughter once filled the ranch house, of Mary's final breath against his chest. The ache burned cold and clean, sharpening his senses. This was not reckless vengeance, it was a calling older than the badge of any lawman. He would not let their deaths vanish into the empty miles. Lightning split the sky, revealing a tangle of switchbacks descending into the heart of the canyon. Elias swung back into the saddle, the storm's first drops striking his face like needles. The gelding snorted, muscles quivering, but obeyed the steady pressure of his rider's hand. Night fell in a rush as they began the descent, the world alive with the scent of rain and stone. Far below, faint and fleeting, came the echo of distant laughter, rough voices carried by the wind. Elias tightened his grip on the reins. The hunt was no longer a memory of past wars. It was now, and it was his. Dawn burned the canyon rim in a pale streak when Elias spotted the rider trailing his path. He had left no easy sign, yet the stranger followed like a shadow, closing the distance with the quiet persistence of someone who knew how to move through wild country. He reined in on a rise of red stone, Colt loose at his side, and waited. The rider emerged from the gray light, a slender figure on a paint mare, black braid swinging against a sun-faded poncho. She drew her horse to a halt a dozen paces away and lifted her chin. "Senor McCrae." Her voice carried the rasp of wind-blown sand, steady and unafraid. Elias kept his hand near the revolver. "Who wants to know?" "Lucia Alvarez," she said. "I follow the same men you do. Caro and his jackals." Her dark eyes held no tremor. "They killed my brother 2 nights past outside San Felipe. I will see them buried." He studied her in the slanting light, dust on her boots, a long rifle slung across her back, the poise of someone who had lived hard and learned to hide fear. "This trail isn't for vengeance hunters," he said. "It is for me," she answered. "You cannot stop me, and you cannot track them alone." The certainty in her tone stirred an old recognition. Elias lowered the Colt, but not his guard. "You can ride close," he said at last. "But you follow my lead. Carol leaves traps for fools. A faint smile touched her mouth, gone as quickly as it came. Then I will not be the fool. They rode in silence through the awakening land, the sky blooming rose and copper above the ragged ridges. Ravens wheeled overhead, their harsh cries trailing like omens. The desert smelled of wet stone from the night storm, each plant beaded with silver drops that caught the sun and burned away. Lucia broke the quiet first. I know these canyons, she said. My father traded hides here. There's a cut north of the Sangre Cliffs where the trail splits. Carol might use it to double back. Elias glanced at her, measuring the calm assurance in her voice. You read sign. Better than most men, she said simply. I tracked a wounded deer 3 days through rain when I was 10. My brother taught me. A shadow crossed her features, but she kept her eyes on the horizon. They reached a wide arroyo choked with mesquite where fresh prints pocked the damp sand. Elias dismounted, crouching low. 7 horses still, he murmured. One with a lame leg. They're slowing. Lucia knelt beside him, fingertips brushing the impressions. 2 rode off to scout, she observed. See where the brush is bent? They will circle back by nightfall. He met her gaze, surprised by the keen reading. You notice much? I had to, she replied. The desert teaches or it kills. They pushed west, the land opening into high plains scarred by dry riverbeds. Thunderheads gathered again on the far rim, dark anvils against the brightening sky. Midday heat shimmered from the rocks, bending the air. Buzzards spiraled lazily overhead, their wings black strokes against the sun. Elias caught himself watching the young woman as she rode. Her posture was spare and disciplined, the rifle easy across her lap. He remembered his own daughter, long gone to a fever before she could grow into such steel. Grief was a language he thought he alone still spoke, yet Lucia carried it too, silent, but fierce as the desert wind. They paused at a narrow spring to water the horses. Lucia knelt and drank from cupped hands, then scanned the ridgeline with a hunter's patience. Tell me, viejo, she said without turning, how does a quiet rancher know the trails like a Comanche? Elias felt the old name coil in his chest like a ghost. I've ridden these lands since before you were born, he said. That is not an answer. He studied the water rippling in the stone basin. Once, I guided soldiers through these same canyons. I learned to see what others miss. She looked over her shoulder, eyes narrowing. A scout, she said, as if fitting a piece to a puzzle. That explains the silence. He shrugged, unwilling to confirm or deny. Some truths were better carried like scars, visible only if the light struck right. They rode again, following the faint trail into a region of jagged buttes and dry gulches. Mid-afternoon, Elias lifted a hand for halt. Ahead, a cluster of vultures wheeled lower and lower, their cries ragged in the hot air. He dismounted, rifle ready, and advanced through brittle sage. A dead horse lay half-hidden in the shadow of a boulder, its flank split by a bullet. Flies droned over the wound. Elias crouched, eyes scanning the ground. One of theirs, he said. The lame one. He pointed to a splash of blood on the rock. They put it down to keep pace. Lucia's face tightened. It means they hurry. Perhaps they know we follow. Or they smell law behind them, Elias replied. He straightened, gaze sweeping the canyon walls. Stay sharp. Carol likes ambushes. They moved on with renewed caution, every gust of wind a possible warning. The trail climbed a slanted shelf of stone where the air grew thin and the world opened in staggering vistas, endless desert to the east, storm clouds bruising the western peaks. Lightning forked silently along the horizon, and the smell of rain mingled with the musk of their horses. As evening neared, they found a narrow cleft sheltered by leaning pines. Elias gathered dry wood while Lucia laid out jerky and hard bread from her saddlebag. They ate in silence until she reached for her rifle and began to clean it with practiced hands. He watched her fingers move, quick and sure. You shoot well, he asked. She glanced up, a flash of challenge in her dark eyes. Better than my brother, she said. And he once outshot a captain of the rurales at 50 paces. Elias handed her a tin cup of coffee. Show me. Without a word, she set the cup on a stump 20 paces off and rose, rifle coming to her shoulder in one fluid motion. The crack split the dusk, echoing through the pines. The cup leapt, struck dead center, coffee splashing into the dust. Elias gave a low whistle. Not bad, he said. She allowed herself the faintest smile. I do not miss when it matters. The firelight flickered against her face, carving shadows that made her seem older, almost timeless. Elias felt the weight of the day settle into his bones, but with it came a strange steadiness. For the first time since the massacre, the burden of vengeance felt less solitary. "You could ride back," he said quietly. "Let the law take its turn." Lucia shook her head. "The law did nothing when my brother begged for help. Justice is ours to carry." Her words settled between them like the scent of pine smoke, sharp, undeniable. Elias looked into the fire and saw the faces of his family, then the endless sweep of the land that had shaped them both. Vengeance still burned in him, but something else stirred too, a recognition that justice meant more than killing men in the dark. The night deepened, stars emerging like cold embers overhead. Somewhere beyond the ridges, Caro gang moved through shadow, unaware of the trackers closing in. Elias stretched his legs toward the flames, the ghost of his old name whispering against the wind. Ghost Hawk, they had called him. Now there were two hunters, bound by grief and a purpose that reached beyond blood. Lucia tightened the cinch on her rifle strap and settled beside him. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was an oath carried on the restless breath of the desert, a promise that neither would face the coming storm alone. The storm came on like a living beast, rolling across the Sierra Sangre with a roar of thunder that shook the stone beneath their boots. Elias and Lucia pressed low along the slick spine of a ridge, rain lashing their faces, lightning spilling sudden white fire over the canyon walls. The sandstone cliffs glowed a deep, wet crimson in each flash, as though the land itself remembered blood. Below, the box canyon yawned black and secret, a hidden hollow where the outlaw camp flickered with the orange of dampened fires. They tied their horses in a stand of twisted juniper and moved on foot, shadows among shadows. The storm masked their steps, every gust a cloak. Lucia's braid clung to her neck, eyes glinting when the lightning flared. Elias motioned for silence, though she needed no reminder. He felt the old instincts return with every heartbeat, muscles remembering the patient stealth of another life, senses widening to the dark like a hawk's wings. The smell of wet stone and gunpowder mingled, sharp and metallic. Voices drifted upward, muffled by the storm, rough laughter, the clink of bottles. Elias pointed toward a narrow draw that spilled into the camp from the north. Lucia nodded and followed as he slid down the rain-slick slope, boots finding purchase on seams of granite slick as ice. A lone sentry hunched beneath a canvas lean-to near the mouth of the draw, rifle across his knees. Lightning flared and died, leaving only the whisper of rain. Elias moved with a silent speed that belied his age, crossing the last distance in a low rush. His hand clamped the man's mouth, the knife flashed once, and the sentry sagged wordless into the mud. Lucia's gaze lingered a heartbeat on the still form, before she stepped past, her own rifle steady. They crept closer, the outlaw camp taking shape. 6 men scattered around a struggling fire, their horses hobbled under a dripping overhang. Black Vulture Caro sat apart, broad-shouldered and wild-eyed, his dark coat shining within the stormlight. He held a bottle to the sky as if toasting the thunder. Elias felt the old name stir in his chest. Ghost Hawk. He had not spoken in decades, but tonight it was a mantle he wore again. He touched Lucia's arm and leaned close. When it starts, keep to the high side. Aim true. No wasted shots. She nodded once, lips pressed thin. A sudden gust bent the fire sideways, sending sparks skittering. Elias rose from the shadows with the storm at his back, revolver leveled, voice cutting through the rain. Jed Caro. The outlaw jerked upright, startled eyes catching the lightning flash. Who the hell? Ghost Hawk, Elias said, the name ringing like a rifle crack. Recognition flickered in Caro's face, followed by a sneer. Thought you were a ghost already, old man. Tonight, Elias answered, I finished the work. The first shot roared like the thunder overhead. Chaos erupted. Men lunged for rifles, horses screamed, the fire collapsed in a hiss of steam. Lucia's rifle barked from the ridge, her bullet taking one outlaw clean through the shoulder before he could lift his weapon. Elias moved through the storm with deadly economy, each step measured, each shot deliberate. A man rushed him from the left. Elias pivoted and fired, the muzzle flash painting the rain in orange fire. Another tried to flank him, but Lucia's second shot spun the bandit into the mud. Caro bellowed orders, revolver flashing. The outlaw's bullet grazed Elias's sleeve, burning a line of pain along his arm. Elias dropped to one knee, firing twice. One shot struck Caro hat from his head, the other shattered the lantern behind him, plunging the camp into a deeper, wilder dark. Lightning answered, turning the canyon white. Caro charged through the glare, knife drawn, eyes blazing. They collided near the dying fire, the smell of wet leather and blood thick between them. Caro swung wide and brutal. Elias caught the blow with his forearm, pain flaring bright, and drove his shoulder forward, forcing the outlaw back into the mud. A flash of movement, another bandit emerging from the shadows, rifle aimed at Elias's back. Lucia's voice cut the night in a sharp cry, and her shot cracked like the wrath of the storm. The moon pitched forward, weapon clattering. Caro roared, twisting free. "You should have stayed buried, Ghost Hawk." Elias answered with silence, the revolver's final report drowned by thunder. Caro fell hard, the storm washing blood into the black earth. For a long moment only the rain spoke, drumming on stone and flesh alike. The surviving outlaws threw down their weapons, faces pale beneath the stormlight. Lucia descended from the ridge, eyes fierce and steady, rifle smoking in the cold air. Elias lowered his gun, breath ragged. The ghosts of old campaigns whispered in the thunder's fade, but he felt no triumph, only a solemn weight, the end of a vow kept. Lucia stepped beside him, her hand warm on his shoulder despite the rain. "It is done," she said. He looked into the storm-swept dark where the horizon blurred with lightning. "Justice," he murmured, voice barely more than the rain. Together they stood amid the wreckage of men and night, the canyon echoing with the storm's retreat, and the name Ghost Hawk faded once more into legend. Pale light bled into the canyon, washing the red stone walls in a fragile gold. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and clean, every crevice beaded with silver drops that glimmered like scattered coins. Smoke from the outlaw fire rose in thin threads, carrying the bitter scent of spent powder and rain-soaked ash. Elias stood at the center of it all, revolver lowered, the weight of night heavy in his bones. Caro's body lay where the final bullet had found him, face turned to the paling sky, rainwater running through the dark stain beneath his chest. Around the camp, the surviving bandits crouched in silence, weapons kicked aside, wrists bound with rawhide. Their eyes followed Elias with a mixture of hatred and awe. The storm had broken them more surely than bullets. The knowledge of their leader's death had finished the rest. Lucia moved among them with quiet efficiency, checking knots, her rifle slung but ready. She paused beside Elias, her braid dripping rain. "They will hang," she said, voice low, certain. Elias looked down at the men, their faces gaunt and mud-streaked. "They'll face the law," he answered. She studied him, surprise flickering across her dark eyes. "The law. They'll stand trial in Red Crossing," he said. "The people will see justice served, not just vengeance." Her gaze searched his, testing for hesitation. "You could end it here. No one would question you." "Maybe," he admitted. "But killing them now only feeds the dust. A rope and a judge will speak louder than my gun ever could." The old name, Ghost Hawk, still hummed in his blood, but he felt it loosening, sliding back into the shadows where it belonged. He holstered the Colt, the gesture slow and final. By mid-morning the thunder of hooves echoed through the canyon mouth. Sheriff Hartwell rode at the head of a posse, sun flashing on wet rifles. They reined in hard at the sight of the bound outlaws and the solitary figure standing among them. Hartwell's eyes widened, taking in the scene, the dead leader, the captured men, the young woman at Elias's side. "Merciful heaven," the sheriff breathed. "You did this." Elias gave a single nod. "They're alive. Take them back for trial." The posse fanned out, astonishment muttering through their ranks. A grizzled deputy spat into the mud and shook his head. "Could have sworn we'd be hauling corpses, not prisoners." Hartwell dismounted, boots squelching in the wet earth. "You had every reason to kill them," he said quietly. "Why not finish it?" Elias glanced toward the paling sky where the storm clouds fled before the sun. "Because a man's word means nothing if it ends in more blood. My family's gone. Killing these men won't bring them back. But a trial, seeing them answer before the town they terrorized, that will last." The sheriff studied him, something like respect softening his weathered face. "Maybe the West ain't as lawless as folks think," he said. Lucio helped load the prisoners while deputies secured the camp. When all was ready, Hartwell turned back. "Riding with us, Elias. Folks should know who brought them in." Elias shook his head. "This is your law to finish, not mine." He met Lucia's eyes. "You stay with them. See it through." She hesitated, then stepped closer, voice a near whisper. "And you?" "I've walked far enough," he said. "The rest is for living folk." For a moment she stood still, rainwater shining on her cheek like tears. Then she touched his arm, a brief, fierce clasp. "Your justice is stronger than any bullet," she said. Elias watched until the posse wound back through the narrow pass, the captured outlaws trailing under guard, Lucia's figure straight in the saddle. Their shapes dwindled to silhouettes against the brightening desert before the land swallowed them entirely. Silence settled, deep and resonant. The canyon, cleansed by the storm, seemed to breathe again. Elias saddled his horse and mounted with a slow grace, the aches of age settling into familiar places. He rode eastward as the sun climbed, the trail a ribbon of damp earth that gleamed like molten silver. The ride back to Red Crossing was long and empty, but word traveled faster than hoofbeats. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, whispers already stirred through saloons and kitchens, the quiet rancher who'd faced Black Vulture Caro and his gang alone, who brought them down not with slaughter but with a justice no man could deny. Children peered from doorways, wide-eyed. Men lifted their hats in silent greeting. Women paused at their wash lines, gazes full of questions they would never dare ask. Elias offered only a nod, moving through the murmurs like a shadow. He did not stop at the sheriff's office or the crowded saloon. Instead he passed the blackened road that once led to his ranch. The ruins waited, stark against the morning, but he did not turn. Some memories had already been burned into the earth, they required no witness. He rode until the town fell behind and the prairie opened once more, a vast, unbroken sea of grass, silver under the late sun. Wind rippled through it in long, whispering waves, carrying the scent of rain and distant pine. The horizon stretched endless and bright, a promise rather than a boundary. Elias slowed the gelding to a walk, and lifted his face to the light. The ghosts of war and family rode with him, but their voices were softer now, their weight less sharp. He had not chosen mercy to ease his own heart. He had chosen it because some part of the West deserved better than endless killing. Far ahead, a hawk wheeled in the clear air, its cry thin and triumphant. Elias followed its flight until it vanished into the shining sky. Then he pressed his heels to the horse's flanks and rode on, a solitary figure moving toward a horizon of pure silver, where legend and men would blur and the land would remember the justice he left behind.